Once upon a time, at the edge of evergreen forest, Lyra Dawnwood walked the ridge above misty forest low. Below, in the shared garden, Orion Frostfield balanced on the wooden arbor. Lyra followed Forestlow's main road. Orion watched villagers open shutters, lead goats to pasture, and listen to the far river whispering good morning. In the shared garden, Lyra knelt and pressed her palms into damp soil. Flowers opened to her warmth, as if the forest gently answered. Up high, Orion swung his legs on the wooden beam. Distant crows called, and the canopy trembled softly in the morning breeze. Lyra wiped dirt from a glowing petal. Orion's shadow slid across her shoulder, and village laughter drifted faintly through the trees. Lyra and Orion walked beside the stream. Water sang over round stones. Birds skimmed low, reflecting the two children in early light. Orion fixed his gaze on the far mountains. Lyra studied his thoughtful face, where dreams always wanted to cross the horizon. Lyra hung small charms among the flowers. Orion stacked firewood nearby, a distant hearth and rustling leaves blending into Forestlow's music. Lyra crossed the village square, nodding to neighbors. Orion paused by the well, hearing water spill into wooden pails in steady beats. Lyra leaned close to a tender bud. Orion watched from the fence, and the whole village settled into a fragile mid-morning peace. Orion suddenly froze on the beam, cold racing along his arms. Lyra shivered too, though the soil beneath her hands was still warm. Lyra looked up. Sunlight around Orion thinned. Birdsong grew sparse, as if the sky itself held its breath. Before Orion's eye, a dark illusion shard glittered, bending the sky like shattered glass. Lyra stood stunned below among the flowers. The shard pierced Orion's eye, then another stabbed his chest. Flowers around Lyra flash froze mid-bloom with a crisp crystal crack. Lyra watched Orion's gaze turn unfamiliar. Frost crawled up the beams, the wind snuffed out, and Forestlow felt stripped of spring. Lyra squinted as clouds coiled into a vast vortex above the village. Orion stood motionless beneath it, held by an unseen tether. Within a column of snow, Lady Erilyn descended on a silver chariot. Lyra shielded her face, and Orion was drawn toward her. Orion lifted from the ground. Lyra lunged through the screaming wind, boots scraping cracking ice, reaching for him before it was too late. Lyra collapsed to her knees on the frozen path. The silver chariot carried Orion upward. The vortex stitched shut, leaving a hollow, icy void. Silence dropped over Forestlow. Lyra knelt alone, her heart beat off rhythm, then stared into the sky and swore she would not give up. Lyra rose slowly, tears drying on her cheeks. She turned toward the distant river as the returning wind carried the forest's whisper. Lyra left Forestlow along a narrow trail through bare trees. Branches snapped underfoot, and far water called her onward. At the half-frozen riverbank, Lyra stopped. Ice pieces clicked together, and the cold current urged her with patient insistence. From the mist, a small wooden boat emerged without a sound. Lyra stared at it like an invitation from fate. Lyra laid her hand on the gunwale. The wood trembled faintly like a heartbeat answering, while river wind brushed her cloak. Lyra stepped aboard. The current seized the boat at once, pulling her from the old shore into fog thick as a storyteller's curtain. At the bow, Lyra drifted through a tunnel of mist, the world muffled, leaving only the river breathing beneath the cold. Warm light gathered ahead. The water smoothed. Birdsong grew clearer, as if spring opened a door for Lyra. The fog parted. Everspring gardens shimmered into view. Lyra entered a realm of radiant blooms where wind carried no frost. Lyra stepped onto soft moss. Mistress Greenleaf appeared among vines, leaves whispering around her like a greeting to a traveler. Lyra watched glowing butterflies and luminous flowers. Mistress Greenleaf observed in silence, reading weariness in the child's eyes. Warmth and sweet fragrance wrapped Lyra. Her breathing slowed, her shoulders softened, as if the storm beyond might be forgotten. Lyra's memories blurred. Within birdsong, Mistress Greenleaf drew nearer, and the invitation to stay sounded like a lullaby. Then, a white flower bloomed at Lyra's feet, its color recalling Orion. Nearby leaves hissed softly like a warning. Orion's image trapped in ice flashed through her mind. Garden sounds warped and drifted away as Lyra clutched her chest and woke. Lyra backed away from Mistress Greenleaf, shaking the vines. Startled birds burst upward, and the garden's warmth tightened into tension. Lyra ran through Everspring. Glowing leaves brushed her sleeves. Petals spiraled in her wake, as if the garden tried to hold her without touching. Lyra sprinted to the river. The boat rose among roots, and she leapt in, leaving behind birdsong that sounded like regret. The light faded, cold mist returned, and Lyra hugged herself, watching the flowered shore blur into distance. The boat bumped a shadowed bank. Before her stood Wildwind Forest, tall pines creaking as the wind howled like wolves. Lyra stepped beneath the trees. Dry needles crunched underfoot, and a distant howl echoed through closing darkness. From the shadows, wolfback warriors encircled Lyra, growls layered over the wind, spears leveled at her heart. Lyra held steady in the ring, then Mira Wildwind dropped from a high branch, landing like a leaf, eyes sharp as steel. Mira circled Lyra, taking in mud streaks and the scent of flowers. Wolves snorted and pawed the ground, waiting in taut silence. Lyra spoke of Orion taken skyward by Lady Erlyn. Mira stared into her eyes, weighing the truth behind her vow. At last, Mira lowered her hand. The warriors eased back, and the forest quieted to the thin whistle of wind. Lyra followed Mira deeper. Fog slid across roots. Wolf steps kept a measured rhythm, escorting a promise. Moonlight opened a clearing. Beneath a white-blossomed tree stood Aru Silverheart, his silver coat shimmering like woven moon. Lyra approached Aru. Mira watched from the edge, and the wind softened, holding its breath for the spirit's choice. Lyra touched Aru's muzzle. Warm breath covered her palm, and the forest fell reverent and still. Aru knelt in consent. Lyra climbed onto his back. Mira nodded, Wolf sat down, and eyes followed her like a farewell. Aru surged from the clearing. Hooves beat a fierce rhythm, and Lyra clung tight, knowing home was already far behind. Lyra and Aru turned toward the mountains. Storm clouds gathered, distant thunder rolled, and cold wind tested the one who dared climb. Aru climbed icy slopes. Snow broke under hooves. Rocks screamed with wind, and Lyra folded low against his neck, eyes forward. On the cliff face, the Windweaver's round hut floated. Ribbons snapped and streamed, chimes calling Lyra by name. Lyra dismounted and stepped to the door. Fabric brushed her shoulders. Wind hissed through stone, asking if she still chose to proceed. Inside, the Windweaver stood amid swirling currents. No tables, no chairs, only endless whooshing, like a room that breathed. Lyra watched wind spun into a luminous ribbon. Her hair and cloak tugged gently under the Windweaver's lightning gaze. The Windweaver offered the ribbon. It trembled in Lyra's hands, humming like layered breezes. Lyra gripped the ribbon and answered the trial of sacrifice save Orion, and still seek a way home for both. Lyra stepped back into the blizzard. Aru waited, antlers glowing, as the ribbon flew ahead like
It's
an
even
arrow
more
through
beautiful
white.
than the stories
ribbon pulled
say.
Straight. Aru charged into the storm, and Lyra felt the sky itself revealing a secret seam. Aru crossed a narrow, icy ledge. Loose snow spilled into the chasm as mist, and Lyra tightened her hold, wind shrieking at her ear. Aru's hooves struck a translucent ice bridge. It groaned and cracked across the mountain, and Lyra steadied her breath. They reached the northbound sage's cave. Blue, cold light poured out. Aru breathed silver, and Lyra stepped forward like an answer. Lyra entered the crystal chamber. Each step rang like a small bell, walls glittering as silence made her heart beat loud. The sage studied Lyra without words. Ice dripped in steady time, like destiny counting down choices. The sage placed the pure flame in Lyra's hands. Warm light spread, not burning the outer ice, but touching fear itself. Lyra felt the flame seep into her chest. Crystals thrummed in resonance, and she understood. To save Orion, she must not go dark. Lyra turned to leave. The sage watched from shadow, and Aru waited at the entrance as snow spun like a closing curtain. Aru carried Lyra onto cloud ridges. Winds roared. The ribbon pointed to a gap in the sky, and the heavens became a door. Aru ran across a dense cloud bridge. Thunder growled beneath, and Lyra hugged the flame close to still her trembling. Through storm, Cloudspire Palace rose ice towers piercing cloud, blue lightning flickering, the structure moaning like a living thing. Lyra dismounted at the frost gate. Aru stood behind. Cold air pressed tight, and Lady Erlin's voice cut through the wind. Lyra stepped into the great hall. Snow motes drifted in pale beams, and her footsteps echoed like a challenge to the white sky. A mirrored ice corridor opened, reflecting Forestlow, reflecting Orion, reflecting Lyra, in versions that shook her heart. Illusions offered a peaceful life without Orion. The outer wind quieted, leaving only Lyra's pulse. As the flame faltered, Lyra turned her back on comfort. The pure flame brightened, revealing Orion alone in ice, and she walked on with burning eyes. Her steps spider-cracked the floor. Illusion walls shattered like glass, scattering bright fragments and opening the way deeper. Lyra reached an ice bridge, suspended over clouds. Wind screamed in her face. Aru watched from afar, and the void churned below. Lyra crossed one careful step at a time. She held the flame to her chest, heard the bridge groan, and trusted her reason for walking. Lyra reached the far end and sank for a breath. The wind softened, and the flame steadied warm as a friend's hand. A mirror chamber rose around her with accusing stares. Countless Lyras condemned her until the flame flickered in trembling hands. Lyra faced herself. She remembered the sage's words, and let guilt stand beside her instead of dragging her back. Lyra accepted the past. The flame flared, carving cracks through the mirrors and turning blame into mist. The mirrors shattered into frost snow. The final door opened, and Lyra stepped through, heart pounding like war drums. In the throne hall, Orion stood at an ice table, assembling shards with mechanical hands. Lady Erlin watched coldly from above. Lyra approached and spoke his name. Orion's breath was even and icy, his eyes empty, and the hall swallowed her sob. Lyra pressed the pure flame to Orion's chest. The ice within cracked, warmth spreading like spring touching a sealed window. A dark shard melted from Orion's eye into a drop of light. It fell to the frozen floor and vanished like erased night. Orion's gaze returned warm and living. He blinked as if waking, and Lyra exhaled as hot tears fell without quenching the fire. Lady Erlin stood silent in swirling snow, her face unreadable. Yet wind around the throne began to sharpen. The palace trembled. Pillars split with thunderous echoes, and heavy ice chunks crashed down near the children. Lyra hauled Orion upright as the ceiling collapsed. He leaned on her shoulder, and she pulled him toward escape before the path vanished. Aru burst in through shattered ice. Hooves thundered, eyes bright, and Lyra knew it wasn't only flame guiding them home. Lyra lifted Orion onto Aru's back. Ice rained around them, wind lashed, but Aru stood firm like a living pillar. Aru charged forward. Hooves struck cracking floors, and the palace roared behind them as if trying to swallow them whole. They raced through collapsing corridors. Pillars fell like ancient trees, and Lyra shielded Orion as his breath grew warmer. Aru leapt through an ice window into cloud. Glassy shards exploded behind them, and the storm wrapped them like a white dragon. They fell through the sky. Wind cushioned them like invisible wings, and Lyra held Orion as Aru found the path downward. Clouds split open, light poured through, and Lyra heard Orion's true heartbeat like a quiet, "I'm here." Aru dropped altitude, gliding toward mountain slopes. Wind shrieked past, and Lyra steadied Orion upright. They landed. Orion leaned into Lyra, and far behind, the final collapse boomed as she held him like reclaimed spring. Behind them, Cloudspire Palace crumbled into distance. Thunder faded, leaving a strange calm across the open sky. Orion's breathing evened out. Aru kept watch, ears twitching, while Lyra looked up. Winter hadn't vanished, only stepped back. Aru carried them down the mountain. Cracking ice gave way to rustling leaves, and the scent of wet earth returned. Wildwind Forest's border appeared. Wolves howled in greeting, and Lyra spotted Mira. In the mist, promise kept. Mira stepped from shadow, approval in her eyes. She said nothing, only nodded. You went to the end. Lyra and Mira traded a silent look. Orion dipped his head in thanks, and the forest wind softened for a heartbeat. Mira raised a hand in farewell. Aru turned away, hooves light on earth, and Lyra knew some friends need no words. They passed Everspring Garden. Mistress Greenleaf appeared among leaves and nodded, blessing Lyra's awakened heart. Floral wind followed them toward Forestlow. Orion breathed it in, remembering home. while Lyra watched the road like a dream. Forestlow emerged in fresh sunlight. Ice melted from wooden roofs, and birds returned as the village exhaled. Villagers gathered at the path. They called Lyra and Orion's names, eyes wet, voices ringing like welcome bells. Lyra helped Orion down. Aru released a warm breath, and Orion touched the ground like returning to life. The shared garden lay in ruin, broken beds, frosted beams. Lyra stood still, hearing her promise inside her chest. Lyra touched a wilted flower. Orion knelt beside her, as if apologizing to the garden for letting winter in. They planted the first green seeds again. The soil softened. Orion's hands trembled but persisted, relearning warmth. Tender shoots rose beneath Lyra's touch. Aru breathed like a blessing, and Orion's eyes brightened as if rescued again. Villagers joined the planting. Shovels, laughter, and fresh earth formed a song that turned the garden into hope. Evening fell. Lyra and Orion rested by the fence, crickets singing, grateful for peace they had fought to reclaim. Lyra and Orion climbed the hill as the sky turned violet. Aru followed, and Forestlow glowed small and warm like a hearth. Forestlow spread beneath sunset chimney smoke, a glittering stream. Orion gently held Lyra's hand,
It's so busy this morning.
afraid to lose her again.
Yes, it certainly
Lyra
is.
closed her eyes. Orion listened to the familiar wind,
We had
hearing
such
both
a good
winter's
time.
morning and spring's
Yes,
promise
we
within
really
it.
did.
Night arrived. They returned under a field of stars. The dark road, suddenly gentle, as if the forest remembered their storm. Lanterns lit the village paths. Warm gold trembled on stones. Aru walked slowly, and their footsteps matched home's rhythm. They sat in the garden beneath starlight. Aru lay nearby, and Lyra whispered of those who helped them cross the white sky. A new dawn rose. Flowers opened in early sun. Orion watered rose, and Lyra's touch found quiet magic again. The market bustled. Children gathered around Aru in awe. Orion smiled tiredly, and Lyra saw Forestlow laugh again. Lyra and Orion smiled amid familiar joy. They needed no hero's crown, only to keep each other warm when cold returned. They crossed a sunlit field. Insects hummed, wind brushed gently. Orion carried tools, and green shoots stretched onward. They rested under a tree. Aru stood guard. Lyra touched Orion to prove he was real, and he nodded softly. "I'm okay." Festival preparations filled the square. Lyra tied ribbons, Orion hung lanterns, and music rehearsed as Forestlow relearned cheer. Sunset blazed with song. Aru moved through dancing shadows, and Lyra and Orion joined the circle, eyes bright as flame. Lyra looked toward the dark forest, sensing Mira somewhere. Orion stood close, and Aru's ear twitched at an unseen greeting. Lyra remembered Greenleaf, the Windweaver, the Sage. Orion listened, and a passing gust felt like their answer. Seasons turned through the garden. Leaves fell gold. Orion gathered branches. Lyra guarded sprouts, loving even the ending days. Snow returned. Orion fed the fire. Lyra watched a fogged window, and Aru's pale shape hovered near the tree line. By the hearth, they sat through night. Wind tapped the walls, but warmth inside reminded them winter no longer ruled. Spring returned. Lyra waded barefoot in thawed soil. Orion laughed softly, and Aru ran through new blossoms like a finale. At the forest edge, Mira appeared for a blink. She looked at Orion, at Lyra, then vanished, leaving a promise in the wind. Far off, ever spring's glow lingered. Lyra knew Greenleaf still kept watch, and she stayed awake inside beauty. A faint aurora shimmered overhead. The northbound sage seemed to watch from afar, and Orion squeezed Lyra's hand, remembering the flame. A playful gust tugged Lyra's hair, Windweaver's greeting. Orion smiled, and Aru snorted as if he recognized it too. Blossom scent deepened like a blessing. Lyra met Orion's warm eyes and knew the greatest magic was coming home. Lyra stood on the hill, Orion beside her, Aru behind. They faced the rising sun. As wind carried a vow, countless stories still awaited.